I'm Michael Dobbs, Lord Dobbs of Wiley, but perhaps better known as the creator of House of Cards. But there's competition out there. My dear friend David Amos has just published his memoirs. And since he's been in the political business now as a member of Parliament, almost 40 years, I think it's about time that he told us all about it. And he's done it gloriously in his book, his new book, Eyes and Ears. And he's going to be discussing that this evening with two of his parliamentary colleagues. It's a fabulous book. It's reflections of an extraordinary life as a great campaigner, a man who worked with Margaret Thatcher all those years ago and has been campaigning ever since on Brexit and on so many other issues. So the book is wonderful. David is fabulous, and you're going to have a great evening. I hope that you will enjoy both the book and this evening. Thank you.
Next month, a book which I have written called Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster, will be published, part of which covers Brexit. And yes, by inference, everyone will be in the book. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the last general election was not fought on how political parties might handle the coronavirus pandemic, but was categorically about ensuring that the result of the 2016 referendum was implemented in full? Will my right honourable friend confirm that that is what he intends to see happen?
Prime Minister. I can indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate my right honourable friend on his new book.
And if you were to read his excellent book, Madam Deputy Speaker, Eyes and Ears, probably available in all good bookshops, you would be aware that he is the proud patron of the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation and has devoted much of his life to campaigning on behalf of our furry friends.
If anyone has any questions they would like to ask me, if they post it in the live chat section in the comments column, I'd be pleased to answer those questions.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And here we are in our capital city, London, the place where I was born, in the East End of London. And tonight I'm going to be interviewed by two colleagues who I'm going to call friends. So we have, first of all, Felicity Buckham, who was elected in the last election, December 2019. And although, Felicity, we don't know each other as well as I know Andrew, we're getting to know each other. And I think you are doing a smashing job in representing your constituency under challenging circumstances. So thank you for giving up your time this afternoon. You're going to be Oprah Winfrey, by the way. And then Andrew, my goodness, I regard you as a protege. So if there are things about you that not everyone likes, I might be a tiny bit to blame, but you and I have known one another for a long time. We're soulmates, kindred spirits. And I think you and Felicity, given your different perspectives, will come up with some challenging questions. So over to you.
Well, David, thank you very much. And it's really great to join you and Felicity this evening. It's true, I've known you for the best part of 40 years. And yes, I admit I am a protege of Sir David Amos. I've learned so much from David over the decades. And I remember David winning his seat in Basildon in 1983. And he was so young, we were all surprised that he was old enough to become a Member of Parliament. But I was in Romford at the time, and I remember that wonderful day when Basildon was a Tory gain, and he held it all the way through until the constituencies changed in 97, and then, of course, went to Southend. But David and I are both very much people from Essex, and I consider Romford is Essex, just as Basildon and Southend very much a heart of Essex. So David, it's a pleasure to be here today, and congratulations on your book. So my first question to you is, having gained your seat, really, it was a gain that we didn't expect. It was one of Mrs. Thatcher's incredible in the 83 election. You were so young Parliament for the first time with all these incredible grandees that existed at the time, and I remember them all so well. What was it like winning that seat in Basildon and then walking into the House of Commons for the first time?
Oh, Andrew, it was awe-inspiring. And yes, we are one in Essex, but of course, I'm with the London audience tonight, and that's where I was born, in Plaistow, in the East End of London. In fact, I've still got a family home in Newham. But look, for me, I know it's sad, at the age of 11, I wanted to be a member of Parliament. The chap at school wanted to be a meteorologist. He became a meteorologist, and I became a member of Parliament. But to me, was someone from my background to aspire to sitting on those green benches, wow, it was a dream come true. And when I look back on that 1983 election, when no one gave me a chance, at the final selection to be the Conservative candidate, the newspapers weren't interested in David Amess going for the selection. It was our then #1 male tennis player, Buster Mottram, who went for the seat, and that was all the news, and they expected him to be selected. Instead of that, at the selection meeting, they chose me instead of him. But when I looked at it, after being chosen as a candidate, we had our local elections. We didn't have one Conservative county councillor. We only had one Conservative district councillor, who happened to be the mother of our colleague, Sarah Dines, Mrs. Elizabeth Dines. And 4 weeks after being selected, she lost her seat. So we ended up with no Conservative councillors at any level at all. And in that actual election, we only got 28% of the votes cast. So when Margaret, the blessed Margaret, called the general election, I thought, oh, my goodness, an election. I had no headquarters, no agent, no money. And I believe in being the candidate, got a lead from the front, which is what we did. And we had a doughty band of campaigners. But I'm going to let you and the audience into a secret. At the end of the day itself, at 10 o'clock, when the polling stations close, we gathered in Summer's house. I forget whose it was. And I said to everyone, look, we fought a wonderful campaign, but we're going to come a good second. Now, when we get there, because we were against such a nasty crowd of socialists, unbelievable, don't let them see that we're disappointed and upset. Keep smiling. Well, of course, I arrived at the count, not expecting to win, no media, not even someone for the local newspaper to cover it. And of course, when we were called up onto the stage, and we saw that we had won the seat, it was absolutely sensational. We had the count in a converted zoo, and all the Labour counters, they were banging the tables, their heads were on the tables in front of them in absolute despair. They were in total shock. So it was a wow thing for me. And I will never forget, now to answer your question, Andrew, we got a coach to drive to Westminster on the first day. And it was magical. I couldn't believe it, arriving in the Palace of Westminster, and all these famous figures were there. Margaret Thatcher, Michael Heseltine, Geoffrey Howe. On the other side, Michael Foot, Roy Jenkins, Shirley Williams. And there was little old David Amess, a member of Parliament. It was awe-inspiring. And I must admit, I probably felt overwhelmed and a little inadequate. I'm no longer overwhelmed, and without being big-headed, I no longer feel that I'm inadequate.
Well, I can certainly vouch for that, because I've got to know David as chair of the all-party parliamentary group on fire safety. And you are so on top of all of those issues, which are clearly so critical to my constituency. I'm the MP for Kensington, so I represent Grenfell Tower, and so important to the country. So I want to first say thank you so much for including me today. Great to be talking to you. I'm obviously a very, very recent MP. You were elected in 1983. So if my arithmetic is right, you've been an MP for what, 38 years. Can you maybe tell me and the audience how things have changed over those 38 years, and in particular for a new MP starting in Parliament?
Oh, delighted to. And Felicity, it was a very difficult challenge for you taking the constituency over the time that you did, with all that's going on with the inquiry. But to thank you for being a member, a very active member of our all-party parliamentary group, and you know that we're going to work with you and support you so that you not only get justice for the victims of Grenfell, but all the other people who have unsafe cladding at the moment. So to get back to the way the House has changed, it's unrecognisable. Do you know there's only a handful of people left in Parliament who were there when Margaret Thatcher was actually Prime Minister? And of course, the first thing I have to say is that, how do I put this? Members of Parliament physically look different to how they did when I first joined. I am old-fashioned, and I think that gentlemen should wear suits and ties when they address the House of Commons. I mean, the idea now that you have people open neck shirts, dare I say, I mean, I'm in front of the audience, sometimes when we vote, they're in jogging gear and all the rest of it. Well, that never happened. And Felicity, the ladies used to wear hats. And of course, there weren't that many ladies at the time, and ladies didn't wear trousers and they didn't wear jeans. So really, MPs look very different. And I do think you could probably typecast Conservatives initially, a bit of money, a bit posh, Labour, supposedly working class, and not so well spoken. Well, that's changed absolutely dramatically over the years. I mean, look, Felicity, your intake, there's a huge number of people who I'm only just getting to know. They seem to be competing with each other for who's been lower in the gutter, frankly. They've all sort of been like urchins with Edith Piaf, like a sparrow. So MPs are very, very different. And of course, when I first started, people wrote letters. My secretary had a golf ball typewriter, so it took 3, 4, 5 days to receive things. I never realized that we'd have the internet such as it is now. And what it meant is that people want instant answers. So Felicity, the chamber is more or less, except obviously what they've had to do during the coronavirus pandemic, it's more or less physically the same. But in reality, it used to be jam-packed. We had Prime Minister's question time every Tuesday and every Thursday, which I thought was far better, just for 15 minutes. And it would be, people would be standing around the chair, you know, there's 650 of us, it would be absolutely packed. The other thing is, I mean, our proceedings weren't televised. They're now televised. They're now piped into our offices. So all debates were very well attended. And of course, you couldn't get away without reading something out and not answering the points. There were hugely articulate people there. I mean, for goodness sake, Enoch Powell, a double first. Forget whatever he might have been criticised on. One of the most powerful speakers I've ever heard. So you absolutely had to be on the mark. And the atmosphere was electric. So that has changed tremendously, really. And I suppose the biggest change of all, Felicity, has got to be the hours. We worked 5 days a week, and we used to go into the small hours of the morning. The first committee bill that I was ever on was the one that introduced what I never called it, but it was eventually called the poll tax. And Patrick Jenkins was the Secretary of State. Well, that sat for nearly 150 hours. We had 2 all-night sittings in committee stage. Now everything is timed. So it really has changed tremendously. And the final thing I would say, colleagues used to have the art of filibustering. So they used the weapon. If you were in opposition and governments come and go, you swap sides. They used to wear people down with filibustering, and all that has gone. I mean, we could have a whole program on how it's changed, Felicity, but it has really changed in every sense. But I still love the place.
Great.
Well, David, we still love you. And I mean, the way you're going, you will be father of the house before too long. I can see that happening for certain. And I look forward to that day. But there is one person who I think has been a towering figure in politics above everybody else throughout your time as a member of Parliament until she sadly passed away in 2013. You know exactly who I'm speaking about. Margaret Thatcher, who was such a magnificent Prime Minister and a personal friend to you and to me. And I remember many occasions meeting her with you, especially that time we had that magnificent Freedom Dinner in Docklands. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Yes, in 1996. So, you know, many happy memories of Margaret. And I know that you were her biggest fan and supporter all the way through thick and thin, through rough and smooth. You were always there backing Mrs. Thatcher. And that's one of the reasons I admire you so much, because when the chips were down, you stuck with her, even though she took us through some very choppy waters. So tell us a bit about Margaret Thatcher and your experience of her as Prime Minister and the leader of our country during those years.
I'd love to, Andrew. And it's not everyone that can say we used to give her a peck on either cheek, you say. And just by the by, being father of the house, look, I've got 5 children myself. How daft is that? And to be father to 649 colleagues, I don't know. I'm number 7 at the moment. Our secretary keeps inquiring about the health of the 6 in front of me. But anyway, what will be, will be. But look, Margaret is the greatest politician that I've ever met. A one-off, and what a privilege for me to have been there in the 2 parliaments. I wasn't there at the first one when she was at her absolute peak, an inspirational figure as far as I'm concerned, and I owe everything to Margaret. And of course, Andrew, you organised that wonderful dinner, and I can see you both singing Royal Britannia together and God Save the Queen. And actually the picture, one of the pictures in the book is with her looking absolutely fantastic. So she is head and shoulders above, I'm sorry to say, any other politician I've met. A one-off, unique style quality. When she used to walk through the lobbies, it was as if there was some sort of magnetism around her. And what I admired about Margaret is that she didn't do what was necessarily popular, but she told people what she believed in, argued it through thick and thin, and then it was up to people whether or not they stuck with her. And she changed our country, and she changed the world and made them better places. Look, I remember only too well, I was a very young politician and Mikhail Gorbachev was a very young leader. And we both met in Westminster. And you know, her relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan, it changed the world. And when I look at the world figures today, and I don't think we've got the best set of world leaders we've ever had, it's through the force of personalities that you can get things done. And my goodness, we needed some more world leaders of substance during this pandemic. But when I look back on Margaret and her unique qualities, I think her total dedication to turning this country round was absolutely remarkable. Sadly, I have to say, Andrew, as you and I know, it did take a terrible toll on her health at the end of it all. She worked and worked and worked. She wouldn't do anything that no one else would do. But can I give our audience just one example, really, in the early days of how I thought, God, this woman is incredible. I was she was elected the leader of the opposition, and I and the Conservative organisation in Newham Northwest went down to Flood Street and gave her some flowers. So that was lovely. And I was called to take part in her first party political broadcast, not the sort of broadcast that we have today. And we met at Central Office. 6 of us got into a sort of a van type affair, and she was stuck in the back, Andrew, with Ted Atwell. Now, you remember, dear Ted Atwell, Mr. Thurrock, and there she is in the back of the car, and he never shut up chatting to her throughout the whole journey. And I'm sitting in the front saying, for God's sake, will you shut up? Jabbing her in the thing. She never lost her cool at all. It got to, we did the filming in Elm Street Film Studios. And I mean, could you imagine doing it now? They had a baby and a ball and chain round its leg, or a toddler, and that was representing the debt of the Labour government. Well, Ted dried up. So he could bash on in the car, but when it came to the tape, he couldn't. And she was so understanding. And there was another lady there. So the big thing about Margaret Thatcher, whatever people view of her might be, you and I, Andrew, know the real Margaret. Everything counted. She did handwritten letters. She knew that we're all sinners. If any colleague was in difficulty, she sent them a little note. And I'll end by saying this, Andrew. When it came to that election for leader, I was in a marginal. I was prepared to go down with her, frankly. I wasn't going to ditch her. And the treatment of colleagues, you know, I could go on and on about it. It was terrible. And I can see her now holding her finger up there just outside the table office because she lost by 4. And it's absolutely tragic what happened because we weren't ready for that leadership election. We didn't. So when in 1992, I didn't have the then Prime Minister, he wasn't able to come on the final day. Who turned up? Margaret Thatcher. And it was absolutely wonderful. So as you know, before she took off, after the polls closed and she was interviewed, she made a lovely little speech about Basildon. So blessed Margaret, you're in heaven and I owe everything to you.
Thanks, David. And those are fascinating anecdotes. During your 38 years, obviously the Conservative Party has been in power for part of that time, but you've also been in Parliament under the years that we were in the wilderness under Tony Blair, and also the coalition period where we were in government, but with the Lib Dems. Do you want to reflect on those experiences, being on the opposition benches and coalition government?
And Felicity, you mentioned a swear word. You mentioned Tony Blair, which I'll come to in a moment. But look, that 1997 general election, and I just wish some of our parliamentary colleagues would reflect on this. They had huge majorities. And although by that time, as Andrew said earlier, the Basildon seat was changed and I was chosen for Southend West, colleagues had huge majorities with 20,000. Well, I'd always fought a marginal, so I didn't take anything for granted. And they were absolutely shocked to lose. Well, I think we lost Romford, didn't we, for a start? And their health suffered. A number of colleagues had heart attacks eventually, strokes. It was awful. And we were left with 165 members of Parliament. That's all we had. And Michael Shersby, who was a member for Uxbridge, had a heart attack, and we were down to 164. John Major, who was still the leader, they sort of struggled to get a shadow cabinet together. The voting took so long, that is why they put in 3 sections with the names. It was always 2. It was because the voting of the Labour was taking so long, they tried to speed the whole thing up. And it was awful. We didn't have enough people to service the committees. And frankly, now you've mentioned Tony Blair. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were elected on the same day as I was. And for me, a complete charlatan. I used to get so angry when I heard people say, oh, David, he's really a conservative. No, he isn't. What conservative would try and break up the United Kingdom? And we're paying for that now. What sort of conservative would, frankly, give all the power away to unelected quangos? And what he did, I could never forgive him for it, he thought, he didn't really like the House of Commons. He thought, right, well, I'm fed up with people holding us to account, filibustering as it is. So I'm going to introduce a guillotine, which of course he had a majority for, and we're going to take power away from Westminster, and we're going to give it to unelected quangos. And it's been so difficult to get power back from the unelected quangos, who their chief executives are normally paid 3 or 4 times the amount that we are, but of course they're happy for the politicians to take the blame for things when we're messed up. And that is what Tony Blair did, really. It was so miserable. And it was such a shame that, you know, after John Major, we then had the William Hague leadership when it only went on to 1, and then we had a colleague, Ian Duncan. So I mean, I could go on about the twists and turns, and I do say to colleagues now, nothing is forever, and the ebb and flow of Parliament, you should never take your constituency for granted. It doesn't matter how large the majority is, and every time I have to say I've stood in an election, I've always prepared myself for the worst. You never know what's around the corner.
How did you find coalition government?
Oh, I didn't want it. I didn't want it. So what happened, Andrew's smiling, we were called into committee room 14, the 1922 committee, lots of new colleagues there, getting very excited that we were going to go into to a coalition, hated it. I've had Labour and Liberals as my political opponents. Give me Labour any day. Liberals, absolutely treacherous. I mean, to me, they were more left than Labour. And the idea that we were going to go into coalition with these people, I was against it. And I wanted us to be a conservative-led, but without a majority, and leave it up to the others. But anyway, look, we went into coalition, and I've got to hand it to David Cameron. I mean, Andrew might have a different take on it, but he did dominate the House of Commons. He was excellent at the dispatch box, and frankly, he stitched up the Liberals. So the tough decisions that they had to make over student fees and all the other things, it frankly stuck with them. But no, Felicity, I didn't really enjoy coalition government. It was very, very strange. As you know, I'm on the chairman's panel and I chair things. So it was quite difficult looking at Liberal colleagues who were part of the coalition government. And frankly, I only thought we went into coalition during wartime. But hey, we did it. And David Cameron was right, because he got us into such a good position, got us a referendum, and look where we are now with this 80-seat majority. Wow, wonderful.
So David, next year we're going to be celebrating an historic year for our country with the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And you've been an MP for 38 years, so you've seen in Parliament a Golden Jubilee, a Diamond Jubilee, and now a Platinum Jubilee. I know that you're as I am, a strong royalist and a supporter of Her Majesty the Queen. So tell us about your royal experiences over here. One of the great privileges of being an MP is you do get from time to time the opportunity to meet members of the royal family, to go to Buckingham Palace, to visit royal events like Trooping the Colour. So tell us about some of the wonderful occasions you've enjoyed in the presence of Her Majesty and other members of the royal family.
Well, Andrew, like you, I love the royal family, and I absolutely salute and applaud your patriotism. And I have to say to our viewers tonight, if you consider last week, the Queen did a Zoom call and she spoke so simply and wonderfully about having a vaccination. And no one else could do that. She is incredible. I mean, this lady, 94. And next year she'll be on the throne 70 years. And I just think we are so blessed to have this wonderful lady as our head of state, rather than a ghastly president, which was what Tony Blair, frankly, was aiming for. So yes, Andrew, I've been fortunate to meet not only the Queen, but her children. I love the Duke of Edinburgh. He and I have got the same sense of humour. I mean, if it was reported, I think we, like him, I would get into trouble because we do say things off but I think he's just absolutely amazing. But the Queen, she visited Southend, and that was a wonderful occasion. And I said to her, "Oh, I understand you're going on to my old constituency, Basildon, after you visited Southend." And she said, "Well, perhaps you'd like to join us in the car," which I thought, I don't think that would be on. And then there was a wonderful occasion at Buckingham Palace when somehow and you know the way it's done, you're sort of given badges and you're in little groups to meet the Queen. I've got to be careful repeating this literally because I don't want to be sued, but she was walking through and came to our group, and one of the group said, "Your Majesty, what do you think of the film The Queen?" Now, the lady who played the Queen comes from the area that I now represent. All I would say is, and I'm not going to repeat exactly what she did and said, but she made an interesting comment about it. The highlight, though, of my meeting the Queen was when I was knighted. It was an absolute thrill for me because the ceremony would have coincided with the general election. And when they came up and said, "Oh, look, your due date is at Buckingham Palace," I said, "Well, look, I've got to be there at the count. I just can't do it." Had a lovely chat with the lady, and my goodness, that was so fortunate. I didn't actually want to be knighted at Buckingham Palace. I wanted it at Windsor because, I shouldn't say this, but you're much more likely to get the Queen at Windsor, and the setting is absolutely out of this world. So the best day of my life, well, there were a number of days of my life, and I have to think of my wife and all the rest of it, but one of the highlights of my life will be waking up at the hotel just by Windsor Castle, seeing the Royal Standard there. So I said to my family, "Yes, it's the Queen." Driving down the mile. And what was so wonderful is many of the attendants actually knew me. They were police officers from the House of Commons, and they made it such a wonderful and special day. And the people who are being knighted and get, dare I say, it sounds a bit big-headed, the top honours, you're in a room together and you rehearse what you want to do. And I looked at one of them, I thought, my goodness, you could have dressed up for the occasion, wearing a scruffy suit. Well, it happened to be the actor Heard, and he was actually wearing, I did ask him afterwards, the outfit that he made, not the Elephant Man, but to play that wonderful role there. So when I was called in, it was just absolutely magical. And the Queen made the disastrous mistake of saying, "Oh, I've seen you being a member of Parliament for rather a long time." Just like Felicity asked me, "Have you seen many changes?" Well, I think 7 hours later, with people in the audience dying and the violins going, she wished she'd never asked me, but no, she did. And it was just wonderful. So yes, God save the Queen. We will never see her like again. And we're so blessed to have her as our head of state.
And you'll be celebrating the Platinum Jubilee next year, David, I hope?
Yes, I will be making a contribution, modest or otherwise, to the two things that we're going to buy her.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that I'm in good company asking about what's changed in the last 38 years. But just going back to the last 38 years, I'm sure that you've seen lots of political highs and lows. So can I ask you, during that period, what do you think is the political high, and maybe also the personal high, and what do you think is the political low? You don't have to talk about the personal low.
I mean, this, for goodness sake, the things that I say to colleagues when they're in trouble, you don't want to know the half of it. Been there, done it, and terrible things. But I have to say, without offending all the listeners tonight, that for me, it was a dream come true when we had the referendum about our membership of the European Union. I just never thought that I would be there when we actually left it. Now that, of course, 48% of the people it doesn't please, but just absolutely amazing what happened there. And I think during Margaret's time, it's got to be the Falklands, it's got to be the sale of council houses, and thinking of London, Felicity, Canary Wharf, absolutely magical what she did there, all through the force of Margaret Thatcher. The low, without any doubt, and I will never forgive him for that, has got to be the war with Iraq. Now, I do not have military expertise. And when we went to that packed chamber, and I know our then leader, Ian Duncan Smith, was given his private briefing at number 10, but common sense told me that this wasn't a good idea if we didn't have an exit strategy. But I listened to his speech, and at the dispatch box, and prime ministers aren't supposed to tell porkies from the dispatch box, he told the House of Commons that within 10 minutes, weapons of mass destruction would reach our country with devastating effect. And I can't prove it to anyone because it was in my mind, but I changed the way I was going to vote. I was going to join, I think there were 18 of our colleagues who voted against it, and I was going to join with them. But I thought, crikey, I can't let the country down. And I'll never forgive him for that. He brought terrorism into our country much more quickly. Okay, we had it with the IRA, but much more quickly than would have been the case otherwise. Absolutely dreadful. So I think that would have been politically the real low, because it sort of changed everything, and there are knock-on consequences as a result of it, because the region is still destabilized. So yes, I have had highs and low. The melting down of Parliament because of the row about what MPs were claiming and not claiming for, I don't think was brilliantly handled. I don't think any good came of it, frankly. And it demeaned the regard that up until then people had of their politicians, and I think we're sort of stuck with that forever, unfortunately. No good whatsoever came of it.
So David, I'd like to ask you a completely different question now. And this is about one of your passions. It happens to be one of my passions, and that is, of course, the issue of animal welfare. I've campaigned on these issues all the time I've been in Parliament. So have you. And this is something that we feel very deeply about. So tell us about all the things you fought for and campaigned for and achieved in terms of making the lives of the animal kingdom and the animals with whom we share the planet with. Tell us about all the work you've done to make that such an important priority for your time as a Member of Parliament.
Well, Andrew, this isn't a dig at Felicity and her colleagues, but I think there has been a siege in terms of our regard for animal welfare generally. And of course, the reason I love animals is, by and large, if you keep feeding them, they're grateful for everything we do for them. And they're so loyal and faithful, starting with dogs. I mean, look at the wonderful dogs you've had, Andrew, with Buster and all the rest of it. And of course, in your constituency, I know how important dogs and cats are for so many of your local residents. They're loyal and faithful. But for so long, they haven't had a voice. And I think through the wonderful Attenborough, and seeing the magic of our wildlife. I mean, Andrew, look, we've been to game reserves, we've been all over the world, we've seen pandas being bred in China, and the magic of all that. So they absolutely fascinate me. And my mother used to say as a child, I was animal mad. You know, I've sort of owned every animal. I've not had an alligator, but by and large, you name it, I've had it. And she used to be dragged along to London Zoo. In those days, you could ride practically anything, really. Llamas, elephants, I don't know about giraffes, but anyway, practically anything. So I love animals, and it's been a long journey to get better protection for them. And I think that I'm very proud now that our present government and our party is doing so much, frankly. We've got George Eustace and Zach Goldsmith together working extremely well together with Victoria Prentice to work with us and change animal welfare generally, because the cruelty that has been meted out to dumb animals for so long. So I'm so glad, Felicity, that near to where your constituency is, we've got the wonderful Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, and near to your constituency, Andrew, we've got your wonderful rescue centre, because, you know, rather than go on the internet looking for a puppy or a kitten, etc., let's try and rescue animals which have had such a tough start in life. I was so proud that I've got this one piece of legislation through a 10-minute rule bill on the statute book called the Protection Against Cruel Tethering Act, which came to my notice as a result of horses, ponies and donkeys being cruelly abandoned in Essex. Lorries used to go and round them up in the wee hours of the morning, and they would be used for animal feed. Very, very cruel indeed. And now that bit of legislation deals with it. So I think, yeah, we're in a very much better place than we were before. And without stirring things up, you know, when I consider with fox hunting, there were only 4 of us who used to fly the flag for fox hunting. And of course, Labour just used it for class warfare. That was never the issue with me. And we know you have to deal with the fox population and the badger population, but I was against the cruelty itself. And again, so many colleagues now absolutely accept that argument. So well done you, Andrew, for your champion, and thank you also for your support as well, Felicity.
David, I want to stick with your interests because we got to know each other through fire safety. So I'm very curious as to why you have focused in on this subject, which is clearly very, very important. And also, I know that the proceeds of the book are going towards 3 charities. So perhaps you'd like to talk about those 3 charities and why they are important to you.
Thank you. Well, over the years, I've had quite a bit to do with the fire service. I don't know if Andrew would actually know this, and you certainly wouldn't, Felicity, but in the House magazine, they used to each week do a piece on new MPs, and they would do a cartoon of them. And one of the door officers used to do the cartoon, and it would be a fire fighter in your constituency who used to frame them. And that was a nice little tradition. But I think cutting through it all, I'll never forget in one election during the campaign, a stupid thing I did, and I would never do it again. I took one of my children, my oldest daughter, canvassing with me, and we knocked on a door. And it was in sort of the rural bit of Batman, and a rather eccentric chap came to the door. He was carrying a bowl, didn't know what was in the bowl, and he sort of could hardly string 2 words together. So goodness knows who was going to vote for. We then canvassed next door. All of a sudden, there was a puff of smoke. We ran next door, and it was just horrendous. He was a ball of flame. Well, myself and my daughter found that quite difficult to cope with. All the neighbours came, we put him out, and the firefighters were absolutely magnificent. They saw us all in a state of shock, and I just had such admiration, frankly, for what they were able to do. He had massive burns. He just survived for 24 hours, and that touched the chord for me. And the person who used to run the all-party parliamentary group is sadly dead, but it was one of the best groups ever. We used to have an annual gathering on the terrace when he had a particular interest in cricketers, and they would all come and talk to us. And for 20 years now I've been involved with it, and it usually runs, Felicity, that whoever is on the government side tends to chair it. And it's been an absolute privilege. I never dreamt that we would be in the spotlight as a result of the Grenfell disaster. But I do much regret that all the reports and the advice we gave to ministers way before your time, if only it had been listened to, the Grenfell disaster wouldn't have happened. So to get back to, and I know we're getting to the end of this, what the three charities are about. The first is for endometriosis. I didn't know anything about this charity until a constituent came to me and said she had endometriosis and explained it to us. 1.5 million ladies suffer from it, so some of the royalties go to her. Andrew, prostate cancer. We chaps aren't really as good as perhaps going to doctors and looking out for ourselves as men. Again, got another constituent with that. But the wonderful Music Man project, where a local resident, deputy head teacher of a school called David Stanley, has absolutely transformed the lives of those people with learning difficulties. So as a result of his efforts, we performed live at the London Palladium. We then went on to perform live at the Royal Albert Hall. And if it hadn't been for the coronavirus pandemic, we'd have already been to Broadway, and we're going to go to Broadway. So yes, that is what the three charities are, who will be benefiting from the royalties.
So David, in your 38 years as a Member of Parliament, you've done some incredible things. You've made some amazing speeches. You've been present for some of the most historical votes you can imagine in the House of Commons. You've travelled to different parts of the world. You've seen some amazing countries. And I suspect you've seen quite a few scandals in your time. So very briefly, as we come to an end of the discussion this evening, tell us about your most memorable speech, the most amazing historical vote, the most interesting place in the world you've been, and maybe you can add in one or two scandals to spice things up just a little bit.
Yeah, to whet the appetite. Look, my own memorable speeches, if anyone would listen to me, I suppose it would have been my maiden speech, because it isn't like maiden speeches are now, Felicity. I spoke, I think it was the 19th of January, 1984. So can you imagine, I waited that long to make a maiden speech. My whip was John Major. He wrote it for me. I had it on little cards because I'd been waiting to speak on the second reading of the rate capping bill, because that was a big issue in the constituents I represented of Basildon. And I've never forgotten it. I followed Ted Heath, and the chamber was absolutely packed. And as I got up to speak, Mr. Speaker, Bernard Weatherall was the speaker. It's a great honour to address this House for the first time. Edwina Curry was sitting next to me, and she said, "And about time too." And everyone went, anyway, later on we became great friends. I even became a PPS. But it was it was just wonderful. Matthew Paris sent me a little note saying how wonderful it all was, but it wasn't. But to actually stand up there and to follow Ted Heath was fantastic. And there was another occasion much later when it was on the report stage of a bill. Wee hours of the morning, everyone groaning, we don't want anyone else to keep standing up, because it's not like we even have a call list now. I stood my ground, and it was about capital punishment, and I was sort of proud of myself as a youngster that I stood my ground there. And the other memorable speeches, it's got to be when Margaret Thatcher made that incredible speech on a motion of confidence after she had been deposed as our leader. And it would have been with Leon Britton's great speech when he was having an argument with Michael Heseltine over Westland, the helicopter company. And it would have been when Michael Foot, who was a great orator, made his memorable speech, and Tony Benn when he was at the top of his game. So they would be the memorable speeches, but the scandals. Look, I've got to say to everyone, if you're a member of the human race, you're a sinner. And members of Parliament are members of the human race and were big sinners. But when I think that we had an all-night sitting, it was on a piece of legislation. Douglas Hogg was the minister taking it through the bill, through stages, and it was to do with firearms. And because we had to keep voting endlessly, and it took about 16 minutes in those days, we adopted a procedure whereby you stood in your place for the vote after a short while. And I'd sat all through the night with John Heddle, who was dapper, highly successful. I didn't think had a care in the world. A week later, he was found dead in his car. He'd taken his own life. Absolutely awful beyond belief. Another colleague found dead in circumstances because financial worries had got to him. The most awful scandal, if you like, on the other side, unbeknownst to us, one Scottish Labour MP was blackmailing another Scottish Labour MP because of his sexuality. And can you imagine, he lived with his parents, and his parents woke up in the morning to find his body hanging in the garage. Absolutely horrendous. And I suppose in more recent times, it's got to be the row about what MPs were claiming and not claiming. It was the most horrendous, horrible time that we could have experienced, because what was actually happening, because Michael Martin was doing the best he could as Speaker to deal with the situation, and he didn't want everything revealed because presumably he thought that no good would come of it all, and it didn't, because it was just awful. I saw it firsthand, the stress and the pressure that it brought on colleagues of all political parties. And the newspaper each day was revealing some sort of sensational thing. And of course, when I look back on that scandal, which changed Parliament, gave us IPSA, and we could all talk about IPSA, it didn't really change Parliament in a good way. I know what was happening as a result of the claims and the way they were done. And of course, they always resisted giving members of Parliament any sort of financial reward in terms of a pay increase. I mean, it just didn't happen because they thought it might be seen poorly by the media. Well, what happened at the end didn't do anyone any good. And the reason we had overnight residents to stay in is because of what I said much earlier. We used to sit until the wee hours of the morning, so you couldn't get home, and you couldn't just get a taxi like that. So you did need somewhere to stay overnight. But frankly, to have that argument with the spotlight on us in the public, it just wasn't going to work. And I'm afraid an enormous amount of damage was done as a result of it, with a third of the sitting members leaving the House, and we lost some really good, valued colleagues. And I much regret that any of that happened. Of course, there have been umpteen scandals, cash for questions, people being involved in stings. I was involved, and I'll end with this one. You can Google it. I was trapped by a Channel 4 program. I think the chap was called Mark Morris, and he did all these series, and he got into the House of Commons in disguise, interviewed myself and a number of people who are still in the Lords, And it was all to do with, one of the things was to do with cake. And I had a constituent who lost her life as a result of taking an ecstasy tablet, and the slang word for ecstasy was cake. And of course, he got into the House of Commons, he got onto my office, that they were convinced it was all genuine. And Tony Newton, who was the then health minister, he at the dispatch box answered my question about cake. And there it is up on the internet now, and it's seen as, oh, how stupid that the MP was conned by it. Well, it wasn't a funny issue at all, because a young girl lost her life as a result of it through taking this particular pill at a nightclub. So yes, Andrew, I've been there and listened to some great speeches, and I've been there through some scandals, warts and all, but in spite of it all, I've somehow managed to survive for 4 decades. And I think there are many people who've been in the eye of the storm who thought, oh, I'm going to walk away from this. I'm not going to take any more of it and give it in the towel. But I've always been there for the long run. And hey, I'm only halfway through my career. So look, I want to thank you, Felicity, and you, Andrew, for giving up your valuable time tonight. And yes, if you want a job, you've got it. Michael Parkinson is now retired. Who knows about Oprah Winfrey? But I think you've asked some really good questions. And thank you for all that you do for the residents in Kensington. You are a legend in Romford, Andrew, and long may the three of us, together with our colleagues, work to make this a better country in which we all live. And thank you, the viewers, for listening to us tonight.
This is my journey so far, where I was born, where I became a councillor, when I was first elected to Parliament, and where I am now the Member of Parliament for. Enjoy my journey. I hope you enjoy reading my book, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster.